Still not working. Okay. Hallo Leute, ich bin Katja und ihr seht Deutsch für euch. As you can see, I still haven't solved my camera problem. I did pretty much the only thing that one could do on a Mac about this, because apparently this is a common problem with updating your system. So it's not my hardware, it's just that apparently this is kind of a built-in problem with the software. Good job. Anyway, until I find an alternative solution, which will probably have to mean another camera, which I'm going to see if that even works out with my disk space and my processor, and if my computer is good enough for that, we're gonna have to live with this. And I'm going again. Okay, anyway, let's get to our episode, because maybe we can all forget that this is lagging like crazy then. So, as you might remember, it's time for grammar this week. Which means we're going to continue with our topic of syntax, so sentence structure. We already know about the most important part, which is the placing of the predicate in both Hauptsätze and Nebensätze, so main clauses and subordinate clauses. If you missed the 2 episodes on that, you should check them out now, because they're really important and you might not understand what's going on in this one if you haven't seen them. So today is our first unit on where other parts of a sentence go. So far, we've only talked about clauses, main clauses, subordinate clauses, because otherwise it would have been kind of tricky to explain where the verbs go, because we've talked about the predicate, and if you have a Hauptsatz and a Nebensatz together, of course there are 2 separate predicates. Today we're actually going to start talking about sentences, so constructions of either multiple Hauptsätze that are attached to another with conjunctions, which would be words like and or constructions made up of one Hauptsatz and one or more Nebensätze. So, in a sentence, we have 3 possible positions for a predicate, if you remember. We have the first or second position in a Hauptsatz, and we have the last position in a Nebensatz. If in a main clause the predicate has more than one part, which can mean that it is a combination of a Hilfsverb and a Vollverb, or that it is combined with a G form, or that is combined with a prefix that is detachable. The second part, meaning the part that is not conjugated, goes at the end of the sentence. Quick example to refresh your memory. Ich trinke Wasser. Trinken is our only verb here, which makes it the predicate. It therefore goes into the second position in the sentence. Ich will Wasser trinken. We now have 2 verbs, will and trinken. Will comes from wollen, which is our Hilfsverb here. So this is the verb that is conjugated, and therefore it takes the second position, while our full verb, trinken, takes the last position because it stays in its infinitive. So instead of keeping with this first, second, and last position thing, we're going to switch the system to left verb and right verb. Because if the verb or predicate is in the first or second position, as I've been calling it so far, that only means that it takes the lefter position of the 2 that is possible for a verb in a German sentence. And if it takes the last position in the sentence, it takes the right position. We need this to move on, because it's kind of awkward to keep saying first or second position for the verb. If we just say left verb position, that means that we have the option of putting something before it, or just leave the space empty. Now, to elaborate this further, imagine a chart in which our left position and right position are always occupied by verbs. Or, now that I think about it, let's just take a look at a chart, completely spontaneously. Nothing else can ever take these 2 positions. Our verbs have a lifelong reservation for them. But what can happen is that something stands in the first position, as we have been calling it so far, so before our predicate. Then we have another slot for things after the predicate, so in between our 2 possible verb positions. This spot is filled 9 times out of 10. And then finally, there's another spot after the possible second part of the predicate. This one is the position that is filled the least often. We will call these 3 spots that are not taken by verbs before, between, and after, because that is how they stand in relation to the parts of our predicate. So today, we're going to take a look at the before section. In main clauses, this section can never be filled if we're looking at questions that ask for yes or no answers, questions that contain an or, so something like, do you want this or that, and imperative sentences. All of these start with the left verb section, so there is no before in them. You see now why it was so important to get away from the whole first and second position thing? Because now we can say it starts with the left verb instead of saying the predicate is in the second position. So, remember, for these three categories, we don't have a before section. These start with a left verb. So, let's get to the sentences in which there actually is a before section. The special thing about this section is that, unlike with the between section, before can only be filled with one segment at a time. That doesn't necessarily mean it's just one word, but if it is more than one, it has to be a collection of words that belong together. So for example, it would be a segment made of a noun that brings along an article or pronoun and also an adjective. So let's look at a few examples for this. I have three sentences here. Sie trinkt, so she's drinking. Then we have die Frau trinkt, so the woman is drinking. And then we have die junge Frau trinkt, so the young woman is drinking. Now, if in addition we also throw a Hilfsverb in there to get two parts of the predicate, we would have sie will trinken, die Frau will trinken, and die junge Frau will trinken. Now, those were very basic sentences. Now let's add an object and a place. If we were to say, for example, that the young woman drinks water in the kitchen, our before section could be filled one of these ways. Die junge Frau trinkt Wasser in der Küche. Wasser trinkt die junge Frau in der Küche. Or, in der Küche trinkt die junge Frau Wasser. Of course, like with the simpler sentences, and as we learned in our first two episodes about syntax, when the verb has two parts, you would just put the conjugated part into the left verb section and the infinite one in the right one. All of these three examples work and are used based on what you want to emphasize. The first sentence is the fairly standard statement, while our other two are less common and would be used to emphasize whatever is put into our before section. So in the second sentence, we would be emphasizing that water is what she's drinking, and in the third sentence, we would be emphasizing that the place in which she is drinking water is the kitchen. Now here are two examples of what definitely does not work under any circumstances. Die junge Frau Wasser trinkt in der Küche. And also, in der Küche Wasser trinkt die junge Frau. These are absolutely wrong in both spoken and written language because there is more than one segment in the before section. Now, what about die junge Frau in der Küche trinkt Wasser? Wouldn't that be wrong too then? Well, here we have a special case, because from my previous examples it looks like we now have two segments in our before section too, doesn't it? Well, we do if you wanted to use it locally, so to also give information on where this is happening and not only about who is doing what. But unlike the previous examples, this one is highly dependent on the context, or rather on the imagined question that you're answering with your statement. If the question was, wo trinkt die junge Frau Wasser? So, where is the young woman drinking water? The correct answer would be, die junge Frau trinkt Wasser in der Küche, or in der Küche trinkt die junge Frau Wasser. The last sentence again emphasizes the kitchen more. Here it would be absolutely wrong to say, die junge Frau in der Küche trinkt Wasser, because you're trying to emphasize the kitchen, not the woman. So here you would have two different segments, which you can then not put into the before section together. You have to choose one of them. But, as I said, there is a scenario in which this is completely correct. So, imagine a party. Let's say there are 4 guys, 4 girls, you and a friend there. Everybody's all over the place and having a good time and everything, and your friend has just noticed that there is a young woman in the kitchen who is drinking water instead of whatever everyone else is drinking. So they come over to you and say, die junge Frau in der Küche trinkt Wasser. So their imagined question here was, welche junge Frau trinkt Wasser? So which young woman is drinking water? Because if they had just told you that the young woman is drinking water, you wouldn't have had a clue which one they were referring to since there are 3 more of them there. But we're referring to her as the one in the kitchen, so die in der Küche. They're making it clear who they mean. So in this case, the construction in der Küche becomes a part of the segment die junge Frau because it needs specification. So all of this is still one segment. We could make it even longer and it would still be one. For example, we could say, die junge Frau in der Küche mit den silbernen Ohrringen trinkt Wasser. It's all one segment because it all relates to the subject, so the young woman. You may have noticed by now that this is the exact same thing as in English. You wouldn't say, the young woman drinks water with the silver earrings in English either, because that would sound like the water has silver earrings or that her companion in drinking are silver earrings. So, that doesn't make sense in English either. So, meaning, if a segment is used to further describe another segment, they become one big segment together. When that happens, the new big segment can stand in the before section no matter how long it is. But as soon as you're using one of the smaller segments not to qualify the noun, but are really going for pointing out that the segment itself, so in our example it would be the specific place of this happening, and not to qualify the noun, but are really going for pointing out that segment itself, they can't both stand in the before section at the same time. One of them has to move. So once again, die junge Frau in der Küche is meant to set her apart from example, die junge Frau im Wohnzimmer. If that is the case, then in der Küche becomes part of the same segment as die junge Frau. You should totally check out the song Die Da by Die Fantastischen Vier, by the way, if you haven't already. Okay, but in contrast to this, if it's clear who you're talking about because there's only one young woman around, in der Küche is normally added to tell somebody where she is, which makes it its own segment, meaning it has to be separate from die junge Frau. We can then either have die junge Frau trinkt Wasser in der Küche, die junge Frau trinkt in der Küche Wasser, or in der Küche trinkt die junge Frau Wasser. All three of these are correct. So, connecting all of this to what we already know about the placing of predicates, this rule is true for all statements and also for all questions that start with a W-Wort, so who, when, where, what, etc. So all questions that require more than a yes or no answer. Because those are the two main cases in which something comes in the before field, so before the left verb position. Remember, we're still talking about main clauses. And that is it for today. In our next grammar episode, we will talk about the middle section of a sentence. Your random word of the week is der Zylinder. Chapeau! Mine's made of plastic, but, Bis nächste Woche. Tschüss!